What do you do when your own family gives you an impossible choice? Marry a man you loathe or watch your country be destroyed? What happens when the only way to save your people is to become something the world says you can never be? How do you negotiate for your kingdom's survival when your enemies have armies and all you have is your mind? These were not thought experiments. They were the daily realities for women who found themselves on a throne. Their crowns were heavy. Their choices were often between bad and worse. But they ruled, they fought, they built, they survived. And the advice they left behind, carved not in stone, but in the consequences of their actions, is still here for us. It speaks to anyone who has ever felt underestimated, outmaneuvered, or responsible for something bigger than themselves. Their world was different. The problems are not. Number 18. Why build a legacy if you're meant to be erased? For more than 20 years, a woman ruled ancient Egypt with the full authority of a pharaoh. She wore the traditional regalia, including the false beard. She commissioned building projects on a scale that few male pharaohs ever matched. Her reign was one of peace and immense prosperity. Then she died, and a systematic effort began to wipe her from history. Her statues were smashed to pieces and buried in a pit. Her name and image were chiseled off temple walls. Her official records were changed. It was a concerted effort to pretend she had never existed. It almost worked. For thousands of years, the story of Hatshepsut was lost. Hatshepsut became regent for her young stepson, Thutmose III, around 1479 BC. A regency was a normal role for a queen mother. She was supposed to manage the country until the boy king was old enough to rule. But Hatshepsut did something unprecedented. Within a few years, she declared herself pharaoh. This wasn't a simple power grab. It was a brilliant, calculated rebranding. She didn't discard the young Thutmose III. Instead, she made him her co-ruler, with her as the senior partner. It was a political masterstroke that kept a potential rival close and neutralized any immediate challenge to her authority. But to hold the throne, she needed more than a co-ruler. She needed a story. Egyptian pharaohs were not just kings, they were divine. Their authority came from the gods. So Hatshepsut created a narrative of her own divine conception. She had reliefs carved on the walls of her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri that told the story of the god Amun visiting her mother in the form of her father, the pharaoh Thutmose I. The message was clear. She was not just a pharaoh by marriage or circumstance. She was a pharaoh by divine right. She was the daughter of a god. She didn't stop there. She adopted all the male titles of a pharaoh. She was depicted in the masculine form with broad shoulders and the traditional kilt. The false beard was not a disguise. It was a symbol of office, like a judge's robe or a king's crown. She was communicating in the visual language of power that her people understood. She was saying, I am not a female king, I am a king. Her greatest achievement was arguably the trading expedition she sent to the land of Punt, a place likely located in modern-day Eritrea or Somalia. This wasn't a military conquest, it was a massive trade mission that brought back incredible wealth: gold, ebony, ivory, and most importantly, live myrrh trees. These trees were planted in the gardens of her temple, a feat of horticulture that had never been accomplished before. The entire expedition was documented in detail on her temple walls. It was a public relations masterpiece. It showcased her reign as one of exploration, prosperity, and divine favor, a golden age for Egypt. She was building her legacy in stone, brick, and living trees. She was defining her own narrative. After her death, her stepson, Thutmose III, finally took the throne as sole ruler. He became one of Egypt's greatest military pharaohs, and late in his reign, he began the process of erasing her. Why? It probably wasn't personal hatred. A more likely reason is that a successful female pharaoh disrupted the traditional male-dominated order of succession. By removing her, Thutmose III may have been trying to ensure a smooth, conventional transfer of power to his own son and prevent any future queens from getting similar ideas. He was trying to rewrite history to fit the accepted narrative. The advice from Hatshepsut's life is about ownership. You must write your own story, because if you do not, someone else will write it for you. And their version may not be kind. In a professional setting, this is about documenting your accomplishments. It's about not being silent about your contributions to a project. It means speaking up in a meeting to claim your idea. It means tracking your successes so that when it comes time for a review or a promotion, you have the evidence. Your work does not always speak for itself. Sometimes you have to be its spokesperson. Hatshepsut built monuments, but her real legacy was the story she told about herself. She refused to be a footnote in her stepson's reign. She made herself the main character. Even though Thutmose III tried to erase her, the evidence was too vast. The monuments were too grand. He couldn't destroy it all. Archaeologists were able to piece her story back together because she had left behind so much proof. The lesson is to build your own case, create your own evidence, define yourself and your achievements so clearly and so publicly that no one can erase you from the picture. They can try to chip away at the stone, but they cannot make the temple itself disappear. Number 17. How do you rule when the rules are designed to exclude you? In over 4,000 years of Chinese history, there has been only one woman to rule as emperor in her own right. She founded her own dynasty, the Zhou, interrupting the Tang dynasty for 15 years. She entered the palace as a 14-year-old concubine of a low rank. From that position, she outmaneuvered every rival, survived palace purges, and eventually climbed to the highest seat of power in one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth. Her name is Zetian. The system she entered was not built for her to succeed. The imperial court was a labyrinth of rules, traditions, and hierarchies, all designed to keep power in the hands of men. Women were wives, mothers, and concubines. They could be influential behind the scenes, but the throne itself was off limits. Zetian did not break the rules. She mastered them. She learned the intricate web of court politics, the factions, the alliances, the betrayals. She understood the machinery of power better than the men who were supposed to be running it. She first rose to prominence as a favored concubine of Emperor Taizong. After his death in 649 AD, tradition dictated that all his childless concubines have their heads shaved and be sent to a Buddhist monastery for the rest of their lives. Zetian was sent away. But she had already forged a connection with the heir, Prince Liji. When he became Emperor Gaozong, he brought her back to the palace. This was her second chance, and she did not waste it. She systematically eliminated her rivals within the harem, including the existing empress. The stories told by her detractors claim she killed her own infant daughter and framed the empress for the crime, but the truth is lost to history. What is certain is that she became the new empress in 655 AD. As empress, she was not content to be a mere figurehead. Her Emperor Gaozong was often in poor health, suffering from strokes that affected his eyesight. Zetian began to attend court meetings with him, sitting behind a screen and advising him on matters of state. Soon her advice became command. They were known as the two sages ruling China together. She understood the importance of controlling the state's infrastructure. She promoted talented officials based on merit, not just aristocratic birth, through the civil service examination system. This created a class of bureaucrats who were loyal to her, not to the old noble families. She reformed the military and agriculture. She also created a secret police force to root out her political enemies. Her methods were often ruthless, but they were effective. She was stabilizing and strengthening the empire while consolidating her own power. When Emperor Gaozong died in 683 AD, her sons became emperor in succession. But she held the real power as Empress Dowager and Regent. She found them both to be incompetent. After a few years of ruling through them, she set them aside. In 690 AD, at the age of 67, she did the unthinkable. She declared herself emperor, founding the Zhou dynasty. To justify this radical break with tradition, she used propaganda, just as Hatshepsut had. She circulated Buddhist texts that prophesied the reincarnation of the Buddha Maitreya as a female ruler. She claimed to be that ruler. Zetian's story is about understanding the system you are in. It's not about fighting the rules head-on, but about learning them so well that you can use them to your advantage. For anyone trying to advance in a large organization, a corporation, or any established institution, this is critical advice. You need to understand the formal structure, the chain of command, the written policies. But you also need to understand the informal structure, who has influence, how decisions really get made, what the unwritten rules are. Zetian knew who to flatter, who to promote, who to spy on, and who to eliminate. In a modern context, this doesn't mean being ruthless in a literal sense. It means understanding office politics. It means knowing that the person who seems to have the most important title isn't always the one with the most influence. It means building alliances, finding mentors, and understanding the motivations of your colleagues and superiors. It means learning the language of your organization. She mastered every tool of governance, bureaucracy, military, religion, and espionage. The lesson is to become an expert in your field. Know your job inside and out. Understand the tools and processes better than anyone else. If you are the most competent person in the room, it becomes harder for people to dismiss you. Wu Zetian ruled effectively for decades because she was a skilled administrator. Her competence was her ultimate weapon against a system designed to exclude her. She didn't just seize power, she proved she deserved to wield it. Number 16. What power does the world's most underestimated person hold? She was born into the lowest rungs of society. Her father was said to be a bear keeper for the circus in Constantinople. She became an actress and courtesan, a profession considered scandalous and immoral in the 6th century Byzantine Empire. By law, a woman from her background was forbidden from marrying a man of the senatorial class. Yet, she became the wife of the heir to the empire, Justinian. She then became the most powerful woman in the Byzantine world, Empress Theodora. Theodora's early life is described in lurid detail by the historian Procopius in his Secret History. He portrays her as a depraved and manipulative woman. While Procopius was almost certainly biased against her, it is clear she came from a world far removed from the imperial court. This background, however, gave her something that the sheltered aristocrats lacked: a deep understanding of the common people, resilience, and a complete lack of illusion about the brutal realities of power. Everyone underestimated her, and that was her greatest strength. When Justinian met her, he was captivated. He was the nephew and heir of the reigning emperor, Justin I. He was so determined to marry Theodora that he had the laws changed to permit a patrician to marry an actress. In 527 AD, they ascended to the throne as emperor and empress. From the beginning, Theodora was not a passive consort. She was a co-ruler. Justinian's laws often refer to her, and he clearly consulted her on major policies. She was his most trusted advisor. Her defining moment came in 532 AD during the Nika riots. A dispute between rival chariot racing factions in the Hippodrome exploded into a full-scale rebellion against the government. The city of Constantinople was in flames. Much of the palace was destroyed. The senators, many of whom despised the low-born empress and the upstart emperor, saw their chance to overthrow them. Justinian's advisors urged him to flee. The ships were ready. His bags were packed. It was Theodora who changed his mind. According to Procopius, she stood before the council and gave a speech that shamed the men into action. She reportedly said she would not flee. She argued that it was better to die as a ruler than to live as a fugitive. She famously declared that the royal purple is the noblest shroud. Her courage rallied Justinian and his generals. They stayed. The rebellion was brutally crushed, but the throne was saved, and it was saved by the former actress who refused to run. Theodora used her power to advocate for the vulnerable, particularly women. She passed laws that increased the rights of women in divorce cases, prohibited forced prostitution, and gave women more rights to own property. She established a convent for former prostitutes, providing them with a safe haven. Her own experiences had given her an empathy for the marginalized that the ruling class lacked. She had seen the ugly side of the world, and she used her power to try and fix some of it. The lesson from Theodora is about the power of being underestimated. When people don't see you as a threat, they become careless. They reveal their weaknesses. They let their guard down. The Theodora used this to her advantage her entire life. In the court, the aristocrats saw her as an embarrassment, a vulgar entertainer. They didn't see the sharp political mind, the iron will, the fierce loyalty she had for her husband. By the time they realized who she truly was, it was too late. In any competitive environment, being overlooked can be a strategic asset. If you are new to a job, or a woman in a male-dominated field, or from a different background than your peers, people may write you off. Let them. Use that time to observe, to learn, to build your skills and your network. While they are focused on the obvious rivals, you can be quietly positioning yourself for success. When the moment of crisis comes, like the Nika riots, you will be the one who is prepared, the one with the clear head, the one who sees the path forward when everyone else is ready to run. Theodora teaches us that your past does not have to define your future. Where you start from is not as important as where you are determined to go. She used the grit and resilience she learned in her early life to survive the treacherous world of the imperial court. She turned what society saw as her greatest weakness, her background, into her greatest source of strength. She never forgot where she came from, and it made her a ruler of uncommon courage and compassion. Number 15, can you build a future with only your mind? In the 7th century, the Korean peninsula was divided into 3 warring kingdoms, Goguryeo, Baekje, and Silla. Silla was the smallest and weakest of the 3. It was constantly under threat from its more powerful neighbors. In 632 AD, the throne of Silla passed to a woman, Queen Seondeok. She had no armies to match her rivals. She had no vast territory. She had her intelligence, and she used it to build a foundation for a unified Korea. Seondeok was the first of 3 female rulers of Silla. Her father, King Jinpyong, had no male heirs, so he chose her as his successor. This was unusual, but Silla had a history of powerful women in advisory roles. Still, many in the aristocracy were opposed to a female ruler. From the moment she took the throne, she had to prove herself. She couldn't do it through military conquest. Silla would have been crushed. So she focused on a different kind of power, the power of knowledge, culture, and diplomacy. One of her most famous achievements was the construction of the Cheomseongdae, which translates to Stargazing Tower. It is the oldest surviving astronomical observatory in East Asia. It was more than just a scientific instrument. It was a statement. Astronomy was crucial for agriculture as it helped determine the seasons for planting and harvesting. By building the observatory, Seondeok was demonstrating that her rule was based on science and wisdom, bringing prosperity to her people. It also had religious and political significance, linking the monarchy to the power of the heavens. It was a way of legitimizing her reign through intellect rather than brute force. She was a devout Buddhist and promoted the religion throughout her kingdom. She built magnificent temples, including the famous Hwangryongsa or Golden Dragon Temple, which housed a massive 9-story pagoda. This pagoda was one of the tallest wooden structures in the world at the time. It was a cultural and spiritual centerpiece for Silla. By investing in Buddhism, she was creating a unifying cultural identity for her people. It was a form of soft power, a way of strengthening her kingdom from within. These projects also stimulated the economy and advanced architectural and artistic skills. Seondeok was also a shrewd diplomat. She skillfully managed the delicate relationship with Tang China, the regional superpower. She sent students and scholars to China to learn, bringing back knowledge and technology. She used her alliance with the Tang to keep her rivals Baekje and Goguryeo in check. She played the 2 larger Korean kingdoms against each other, using diplomacy and strategic alliances to survive. She was always thinking several moves ahead, like a chess master on a geopolitical board. The advice from Queen Seondeok's reign is to invest in what lasts. Armies can be defeated, fortunes can be lost, but knowledge and culture can endure for centuries. The Cheomseongdae still stands today. The temples she built became centers of learning and art. She laid the cultural and intellectual groundwork that would eventually allow Silla to unify the Korean peninsula after her death. She understood that a nation's true strength is not just in its military, but in its people's skills, its shared culture, and its intellectual capital. This applies directly to our own lives and careers. It's easy to focus on short-term wins, the quick project, the immediate profit. Seondeok's approach encourages us to think about long-term investment. For an individual, this means investing in your own education and skills. Learning a new language, taking a course, reading widely, these are the things that build your personal intellectual capital. They make you more adaptable and valuable in the long run. For a business or an organization, it means investing in research and development, in training your employees, in building a strong company culture. These things don't always show an immediate return on investment, but they are what creates sustainable success. They are the foundation upon which future growth is built. Queen Seondeok couldn't win an arms race, so she started a knowledge race. She proved that you don't have to be the biggest or the strongest to win. You just have to be the smartest. She built a future for her kingdom not with swords, but with an observatory, a pagoda, and a generation of scholars. Number 14 is loyalty of feeling or a transaction. She was at different times the Queen of France and the Queen of England. She was the mother of 2 English kings. She went on a crusade. She was imprisoned by her own husband for 16 years. At the age of 80, she was still a major political force, riding on horseback across the Pyrenees to secure a marriage alliance. Her life spanned most of the 12th century, a time of constant warfare and shifting loyalties. Her name was Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor inherited the vast and wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine in southwestern France in 1137, when she was just a teenager. This made her the most eligible heiress in Europe. Her lands were larger and richer than those of the King of France himself. She was immediately married to the heir to the French throne, who became King Louis VII. As Queen of France, she was a vibrant and cultured presence in the austere Parisian court. She even accompanied her husband on the Second Crusade, a journey fraught with danger and political intrigue. But the marriage was not a happy one. Louis was pious and indecisive. Eleanor was headstrong and politically astute. They were a mismatch. Crucially, in 15 years of marriage, she produced only 2 daughters. With no male heir and with growing personal and political differences, the marriage was annulled in 1152. This was a shocking event, but Eleanor was not one to sit idle. Within 8 weeks, she married Henry Plantagenet, the Duke of Normandy, and claimed to the English throne. This marriage was a political earthquake. By combining Eleanor's lands in Aquitaine with Henry's lands in Normandy and Anjou, they created the Angevin Empire, a vast territory that stretched from the borders of Scotland to the Pyrenees. 2 years later, Henry became King Henry II of England. Eleanor was now Queen of England. This second marriage was passionate and tumultuous. They had 8 children together, including 5 sons, but Henry was a restless, ambitious, and unfaithful husband. Eleanor was not a submissive wife. Their relationship soured over the years. Eleanor encouraged her sons to rebel against their father in 1173. The rebellion failed, and Henry had Eleanor placed under house arrest. She remained his prisoner for 16 years, moved between various castles in England. It was only when Henry II died in 1189 that she was freed by their son, Richard the Lionheart, who became the new king. Eleanor, now in her late 60s, entered the most powerful phase of her life. She ruled as regent while Richard went off on the Third Crusade. She governed England, raised the enormous ransom needed to free him when he was captured, and put down a rebellion by her youngest son, John. After Richard's death, she supported John's claim to the throne and continued to be a key advisor and diplomat, securing alliances and protecting her ancestral lands in Aquitaine. She was active in politics until her death at the age of 82. Eleanor's life offers a masterclass in understanding that loyalty is often a matter of mutual interest. She was loyal to her first husband, Louis, until it was clear that their interests no longer aligned. The lack of a male heir and their personal incompatibility made the alliance unworkable. Her loyalty shifted to a new partner, Henry, who could help her secure her lands and offer a more dynamic future. Her loyalty was not fickle. It was strategic. When Henry imprisoned her, her loyalty to him ended. She then focused on the interests of her sons, particularly her favorite, Richard. Her support for them was not just maternal affection, it was also a political calculation. By backing her sons, she was ensuring the future of her dynasty and her own influence. She understood that alliances, whether in marriage or in politics, are partnerships. When one side ceases to benefit, the partnership is in jeopardy. This is a pragmatic and sometimes uncomfortable lesson. We like to think of loyalty as a pure emotional bond. But in the world of power and often in business and careers, it is transactional. Your loyalty to a company is based on the understanding that it provides you with salary, opportunities for growth, and a decent work environment. The company's loyalty to you extends as long as you are providing value. When that transaction becomes one-sided, the relationship breaks down. Eleanor teaches us to choose our allies carefully based on shared goals and mutual respect. She teaches us that it is not disloyal to leave a situation, a job, a partnership, an alliance that is no longer serving your interests, especially if it has become destructive. She also shows the importance of building a network of your own. Her power ultimately came not from her husband's, but from her own inheritance, her lands in Aquitaine, and the loyalty she commanded from her own subjects and her children. Your primary loyalty should be to securing your own foundation, because that is the only thing you can truly count on when other alliances fail. Number 13. When is an empire's strength its greatest weakness? In the middle of the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire was in crisis. It was fractured by civil wars, economic collapse, and constant threats on its borders. In the East, a new power rose to challenge Roman dominance. It was the city of Palmyra, a wealthy oasis city on the trade routes connecting Persia and the Mediterranean. And it was led by a queen, Zenobia. Zenobia's husband, Odaenathus, was the ruler of Palmyra. He was a loyal Roman client king who had successfully fought against the Sasanian Persians, Rome's great eastern rival. For his services, Rome granted him a special command over the eastern provinces. But in 267 AD, Odaenathus and his eldest son were assassinated. Zenobia took power as regent for her infant son, Vabalithus. She was not content to be a mere placeholder. Zenobia was highly educated, fluent in several languages, and claimed descent from Cleopatra. She was a charismatic and ambitious ruler. She quickly consolidated her power, and then she began to expand. She was not just defending Palmyra's borders, she was building an empire. Her armies conquered much of the Roman East, including Syria, Palestine, and, most shockingly, the rich province of Egypt in 270 AD. At its height, the Palmyrene Empire stretched from modern-day Turkey to Egypt. For a time, Zenobia maintained the fiction that she was acting on behalf of Rome, securing its eastern territories during a period of instability. And coins were minted with the image of her son on one side and the Roman Emperor Aurelian on the other. But this was a thin veneer. In 272 AD, she took the final step. She declared her son Augustus and herself Augusta, titles reserved for the Roman emperor and his empress. She declared Palmyra's independence. It was a direct challenge to Roman authority. The Roman Emperor Aurelian was a tough and determined soldier. He had just finished dealing with breakaway provinces in the west. He could not tolerate a rival empire in the east. He marched his legions against Zenobia. Palmyra's strength was its control of the trade routes and its skilled heavy cavalry. It had grown rich and powerful by being a vital link in the east-west trade, but this strength was also its weakness. Palmyra was an oasis city in the middle of a desert. It was entirely dependent on the trade that passed through it. It did not have the vast agricultural base or the massive population of Rome. Its empire, though large, was a recent conquest. The loyalty of its new subjects was not deep. Rome, on the other hand, was a superpower with immense resources, centuries of military experience, and a deep-seated belief in its own right to rule the world. Aurelian's campaign was swift and brutal. He defeated Zenobia's armies in 2 major battles. He then besieged Palmyra itself. The city, cut off from its trade and supplies, could not hold out. Zenobia tried to flee to Persia to seek allies, but she was captured by Roman cavalry. Palmyra surrendered. Zenobia was taken back to Rome and paraded through the streets in golden chains as part of Aurelian's triumph. Zenobia's story is a lesson in understanding the limits of your power. She built something incredible. She challenged the greatest empire the world had ever known. But she overreached. She mistook a period of Roman weakness for permanent decline. She underestimated her enemy's resilience and its sheer scale. Palmyra's strength was its agility and its position as a trade hub. When it tried to become a traditional territorial empire like Rome, it was playing a game it could not win. It was a niche player trying to take on the market leader at its own game. This is a classic strategic error, both in geopolitics and in business. A smaller company can thrive by being innovative, fast-moving, and focused on a specific market niche. But if that company tries to directly compete with a massive, established corporation across the board, it often gets crushed. The larger entity has more resources, greater brand recognition, and the ability to absorb losses that would bankrupt the smaller one. The advice from Zenobia's fall is to know your strengths and play to them. Understand the competitive landscape. Don't mistake an opponent's temporary distraction for a permanent vulnerability. Zenobia's success came from exploiting a power vacuum. Her failure came when she believed she could fill that vacuum permanently. She pushed her advantage too far, triggering a response she could not handle. Sometimes the smartest move is not to go for total victory, but to consolidate your gains and secure your position. Zenobia could have potentially negotiated a semi-independent status for Palmyra within the Roman system, preserving its wealth and influence. By declaring full independence and imperial titles, she crossed a line that forced Rome to respond with its full might. The lesson is to know when to push and when to consolidate. Knowing the limits of your own strength is not a weakness, it is a vital part of strategic wisdom. Number 12. How do you fight an enemy you can't defeat head-on? In the early 17th century, the Portuguese arrived in West Central Africa with three goals: to control the slave trade, to find silver mines, and to establish a colony. They were a formidable force. With firearms and a ruthless military strategy, they began to conquer and subjugate the local kingdoms. One of these kingdoms was Ndongo, and its greatest defender was a woman named Nzinga Mbande. Nzinga first appears in the historical record in 1622, when she was sent by her brother, the king of Ndongo, to negotiate a peace treaty with the Portuguese governor in Luanda. The governor, in a calculated gesture of disrespect, provided no chair for her, expecting her to stand before him. Nzinga, without missing a beat, ordered one of her servants to get on his hands and knees. She then sat on his back as if it were a throne and negotiated with the governor as an equal. The incident became legendary. It demonstrated her quick thinking, her pride, and her refusal to be intimidated. She negotiated a treaty, but the Portuguese did not honor it. A few years later, her brother died, and Nzinga became queen of Ndongo around 1624. She faced an impossible situation. The Portuguese were relentless in their slave raids and military campaigns. Her own kingdom was racked by internal political divisions. A direct military confrontation with the Portuguese was a losing battle. They had superior weapons and a fortified position on the coast. So Nzinga adapted. She realized she could not defeat the Portuguese in a conventional war. Instead, she waged a brilliant guerrilla campaign against them for nearly 4 decades. She led her armies in the field herself. She retreated when necessary, melting into the interior where the Portuguese could not easily follow. She formed alliances with other local groups who were also resisting the Portuguese. She was a master of diplomacy and political maneuvering. When the Portuguese tried to install a puppet king on the throne of Ndongo, Nzinga didn't give up. She moved her people east and established a new kingdom in Matamba, conquering it and making it her base of operations. From Matamba, she continued her resistance. She also welcomed runaway slaves and defecting African soldiers from the Portuguese army into her own forces, swelling her ranks and weakening her enemy at the same time. One of her most remarkable strategic moves was her alliance with the Dutch. The Dutch were the main European rivals of the Portuguese. When the Dutch captured Luanda from the Portuguese in 1641, Nzinga saw her opportunity. She allied with them, combining her forces with theirs to fight their common enemy. It was a pragmatic alliance based on a shared interest in weakening the Portuguese. It showed her ability to think geopolitically, to see the bigger picture beyond her immediate struggle. Nzinga fought the Portuguese until she was in her late 70s. She was never decisively defeated. In the end, she negotiated a peace treaty with the Portuguese that recognized her as the ruler of Matamba and respected its territorial integrity. She died in 1663 at the age of 80, having successfully prevented the Portuguese from completely conquering her lands during her lifetime. The lesson from Nzinga Mbande is about strategic flexibility. When faced with a more powerful opponent, you don't play their game. You change the rules. Nzinga couldn't win a stand-up fight, so she refused to have one. She used speed, surprise, and knowledge of the terrain. She turned her enemy's strengths, their heavy armor and reliance on supply lines, into weaknesses. This is the essence of asymmetric warfare, but the principle applies to any competitive situation where you are the underdog. If you're a small startup competing with a tech giant, you don't try to outspend them on marketing. You out-innovate them. You build a community. You offer better customer service. You do the things the big slow-moving corporation can't do. You change the battlefield from price to something else like design or user experience. And Zynga's story also teaches us that retreat is not the same as defeat. She gave up territory, she moved her entire kingdom, but she never gave up the fight. Sometimes the wisest move is to take a step back, regroup, and find a new angle of attack. It's about preserving your core strength to fight another day. It's about adapting your strategy without ever losing sight of your ultimate goal. Her alliances, first with other African groups and then with the Dutch, show the power of finding common cause. In a career or in business, this means building networks and partnerships. You don't have to face your challenges alone. Look for others whose interests align with yours, even if they are temporary or unexpected allies. Nzinga Mbande's long reign was a masterclass in survival and resistance. She could not stop the tide of colonialism, but she built a dam that held it back for a lifetime, using not just courage, but cunning, diplomacy, and an absolute refusal to fight a battle she knew she could not win. Number 11, do the ends justify breaking every norm? By the mid-15th century, the Iberian Peninsula, what is now Spain and Portugal, had been a battleground for centuries. Christian kingdoms in the north had been slowly pushing back the Moorish Muslim rule in the south in a process called the Reconquista. The peninsula was a patchwork of rival kingdoms. The most powerful of these Christian kingdoms were Castile and Aragon. And in 1469, a marriage took place that would change the course of history. Isabella I of Castile married Ferdinand II of Aragon. This marriage was a massive political gamble, and it broke all the rules. Isabella was the heir to the throne of Castile, but her claim was contested. The marriage to Ferdinand was done in secret, against the wishes of her half-brother, the King of Castile. She forged a papal document to approve the marriage because she and Ferdinand were cousins. From the very beginning, she was willing to bend and break religious and political norms to achieve her goals. When her brother died in 1474, Isabella immediately had herself crowned Queen of Castile. This was another radical act. She did not wait for her husband. She seized the moment and claimed her own power. When Ferdinand arrived, he was furious. He expected to rule Castile as king. Isabella refused. After intense negotiations, they worked out an unprecedented arrangement. They would rule their kingdoms jointly. Their motto was Tanto monta, monta tanto, Isabel como Fernando. They amount to the same, Isabella and Ferdinand. They were co-monarchs, a partnership of equals that was unheard of at the time. Together, the Catholic monarchs, as they came to be known, had a clear set of goals. They wanted to centralize power, break the influence of the rebellious nobility, reform the church, and complete the Reconquista by conquering the last remaining Muslim stronghold in Granada. To achieve this, they were willing to use any means necessary. They established a national police force to bring law and order to the countryside. They reorganized the government to make it more efficient and loyal to the crown. And most infamously, in 1478, they established the Spanish Inquisition. The Inquisition was a church court designed to enforce religious orthodoxy. Its primary targets were conversos, Jews who had converted to Christianity but were suspected of secretly practicing their old faith. It was a tool of terror and social control used to create a unified Catholic state. In 1492, they achieved two of their greatest ambitions. In January, the armies of Castile and Aragon finally conquered Granada, ending almost 800 years of Muslim rule on the peninsula. And in August of that same year, against the advice of many of his experts, Isabella sponsored the voyage of an obscure Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus. She saw the potential for a new trade route to Asia and a chance to spread Christianity. The discovery of the Americas would transform Spain into a global superpower and unleash a new era of European colonialism. But 1492 was also the year of the Alhambra Decree. Isabella and Ferdinand gave Spain's Jewish population a stark choice: convert to Catholicism or leave the country. Tens of thousands were forced into exile. It was a brutal act of religious persecution, part of their larger project of forging a single unified Catholic Spanish identity. Isabella's reign is a study in the ruthless pursuit of a vision. Her vision was a strong, centralized, and devoutly Catholic Spain. She achieved that vision, she united the country, laid the foundation for a global empire, and became one of the most powerful and significant rulers in European history. But the price was enormous. Her methods involved religious persecution, the expulsion of an entire population, and the establishment of an institution of terror. The advice that can be drawn from her life is a difficult one. It is about the necessity, at times, of breaking with convention to achieve a great objective. Isabella did not accept the limited role society had planned for her as a political pawn. She made her own rules. She forged her own path to power for anyone who is trying to change an institution from within or to launch a disruptive new venture. Her story is a lesson in audacity. Sometimes you cannot wait for permission, you have to act. However, her legacy is also a profound cautionary tale. It forces us to ask a hard question: do the ends justify the means? She built a powerful nation, but she did so through coercion and intolerance. In the Spanish Inquisition and the expulsion of the Jews are dark stains on her record. The lesson here is that when you break the rules, you must be intensely aware of the moral and human cost. Isabella's life suggests that to achieve something truly transformative, you may have to challenge existing structures and norms. But it also warns that the line between a visionary leader and a ruthless tyrant can be perilously thin. The pursuit of a grand vision without a strong ethical compass can lead to terrible consequences. She rewrote the rulebook for what a queen could be and what a nation could become. But the new rules she wrote were, for many, far crueler than the old ones. Number 10. Is it better to be loved, feared, or simply understood? In 1558, a 25-year-old woman ascended to the throne of England. The country she inherited was a mess. It was religiously divided between Protestants and Catholics, nearly bankrupt and weakened from a recent, humiliating war with France. The new queen, Elizabeth I, was the daughter of Henry V and his executed second wife, Anne Boleyn. Her very legitimacy was in question in the eyes of many Catholics. Few expected her to last long. She went on to rule for 44 years in what became known as the Elizabethan Age, a golden era of English power and culture. Elizabeth's survival and her success was built on a masterful understanding of public relations. She knew that her power as a female monarch in a man's world was not absolute. It depended on the loyalty of her people and the respect or fear of her rivals. She spent her entire reign carefully crafting and, managing her public image. She was arguably the first great master of political branding. Early in her reign, she addressed the religious turmoil. She established the Elizabethan religious settlement, which created the Church of England as a moderate Protestant church. It was a compromise designed to be acceptable to the majority of her subjects. It didn't please the radical Puritans or the hardline Catholics, but it brought a measure of stability. She was positioning herself as a pragmatist, a ruler who put the unity of her kingdom above dogmatic purity. Her biggest branding challenge was her status as an unmarried woman. A queen was expected to marry and produce an heir to secure the succession. For decades, the question of her marriage was the central issue of English politics and foreign policy. She was courted by princes and kings from all over Europe. Elizabeth turned this vulnerability into a strength. She used the endless marriage negotiations as a diplomatic tool, playing one suitor against another, keeping potential enemies off balance. She also cultivated the image of the Virgin Queen, married only to her kingdom and people. This was a powerful piece of political theater. It elevated her above the messy business of dynastic marriage politics and created a cult of personality around her. She became a semi-divine figure, an object of national devotion. Poets and playwrights celebrated her. Her image was everywhere, in carefully controlled portraits that depicted her as ageless, powerful, and richly adorned. The jewels and magnificent dresses were not just personal adornments, they were symbols of the wealth and power of England itself. She knew how to connect with her people. She went on regular progresses, traveling through the country with her court, staying at the houses of nobles. This allowed her subjects to see her, and it allowed her to see them. She was a gifted public speaker. Her most famous speech came in 1588 as the Spanish Armada was preparing to invade England. She went to Tilbury to address her troops. Dressed in a silver breastplate over a white velvet gown, she delivered a speech that has echoed through history. She told her soldiers, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." In that moment, she was not just a queen, she was a warrior, the embodiment of the nation's defiance. Elizabeth's reign teaches that your image is one of your most valuable assets. It's not about being fake. It's about being deliberate. It's about understanding how you are perceived and actively shaping that perception to align with your goals. In any leadership role, from managing a small team to running a large company, how you present yourself matters. Your words, your actions, your appearance, they all send a message. Elizabeth knew what message she wanted to send: strength, stability, and unwavering devotion to England. And she sent it consistently for over 40 years. This is about managing your personal brand. Are you seen as reliable, innovative, a good listener, a decisive leader? These perceptions are not formed by accident. They are the result of consistent behavior over time. And Elizabeth controlled her narrative. She had a team of advisors like William Cecil who helped her manage the affairs of state, but she was her own best spin doctor. She also understood the power of symbols. Her portraits, her mottos, her carefully crafted public appearances, they were all part of a sophisticated messaging campaign. The lesson is to think about the symbols in your own professional life. How you communicate in emails, how you present in meetings, how you dress it, all contributes to your image. Elizabeth chose to be both loved and feared. She wanted the devotion of her people, but she also wanted her enemies, both at home and abroad, to think twice before challenging her. But perhaps most importantly, she wanted to be understood on her own terms, not as a weak woman, not as a political pawn to be married off, but as a legitimate and powerful prince in her own right. She spent a lifetime making sure that was exactly how the world saw her. Number 9. What is the true price of duty? In 1384, a 10-year-old girl was crowned not queen, but king of Poland. Her name was Jadwiga. The Polish nobles insisted on crowning her king to make it clear that she was the monarch in her own right, not simply a queen consort who derived her power from a husband. She was the heir to the Polish throne, a young girl in a kingdom surrounded by powerful and aggressive neighbors, most notably the Teutonic Knights. The fate of her country rested on her small shoulders. Jadwiga was already betrothed to a young Austrian prince, William of Habsburg. By all accounts, it was a genuine love match. They had grown up together, and she was devoted to him. But the Polish nobles had other plans. They saw a strategic opportunity to neutralize a major threat and create a powerful new state. Their plan involved Jadwiga breaking her engagement to William and marrying a man she had never met, Jogaila, the Grand Duke of Lithuania. Lithuania was the last pagan state in Europe. Jogaila was considered a barbarian by many in Christian Europe, but he was a powerful ruler, and an alliance with Lithuania would create a massive Polish-Lithuanian commonwealth strong enough to challenge the Teutonic Knights. The nobles presented Jadwiga with the choice. She could follow her heart, marry William, and likely plunge Poland into a civil war and a losing battle with its enemies. Or she could sacrifice her personal happiness for the security and future of her kingdom. Jadwiga was a devout Christian. She was also a teenager in love. The decision caused her immense anguish. There are stories of her trying to flee the castle to be with William. But in the end, after long periods of prayer and consultation with her advisors, she made her choice. She chose duty. In 1386, at the age of 12, she married the 35-year-old Jogaila. As part of the marriage agreement, Jogaila converted to Christianity, and all of Lithuania with him. He was crowned King of Poland, ruling alongside Jadwiga. The marriage was a spectacular political success. The Polish-Lithuanian Union became one of the largest and most powerful states in Europe. It successfully defeated the Teutonic Knights in the decisive Battle of Grunwald in 1410. though Jadwiga did not live to see this. The union of the two states lasted for over 400 years. Jadwiga's personal sacrifice secured her country's future for generations. And Jadwiga did not just sit back and let her husband rule. She was an active monarch. She was a skilled diplomat, mediating disputes between neighboring rulers. She led military campaigns to reclaim lost territory. But her most lasting legacy was her patronage of learning and charity. She donated all of her personal jewelry to restore and expand the University of Krakow, which is now known as the Jagiellonian University in honor of her dynasty. It is one of the oldest and most respected universities in Europe. She also founded hospitals and endowed churches. She was known for her piety and her deep compassion for the poor. She died in 1399 at the age of 25 from complications of childbirth. Her newborn daughter died with her. Her life was tragically short, but her impact was immense. She is now venerated as a saint in the Catholic Church. Jadwiga's story is a powerful lesson about the conflict between personal desire and public responsibility. She was forced to make a choice that most of us will never have to face, with the fate of a nation hanging in the balance. Her decision teaches a profound lesson about leadership. True leadership is often about putting the needs of the group, the team, the company, the community, the country ahead of your own personal wants. This doesn't mean you should have no personal life or that your own happiness doesn't matter, but it does mean that in moments of critical decision, a leader has to consider the greater good. It's the CEO who forgoes a bonus to avoid laying off employees. It's the team leader who stays late to help a struggling colleague, even though they would rather be at home. It's the parent who gives up a personal dream to provide for their children. Jadwiga's life asks us to think about what we are willing to sacrifice for the things we are responsible for. Her choice was extreme, but the principle is universal. Duty is not always glamorous. It is often a heavy burden. But her story suggests that there is a deep and lasting fulfillment in serving something larger than yourself. Her personal love story had a sad ending, but her public love story, her devotion to her people and her kingdom, created a legacy that endured for centuries. She paid the high price of duty, and in doing so, became one of the most beloved figures in her nation's history. Number 8. What happens when you want a different life than the one you were given? She was born to be a king, not a queen, a king. Her father, the great warrior King Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden, made sure of it. When Christina was born in 1626, he was initially told she was a boy. When the mistake was discovered, he was not disappointed. He declared, "She will be clever, for she has deceived us all." He ordered that she be raised with the education and training of a male heir. She studied politics, philosophy, classics, and theology for 10 hours a day. She learned to ride, fence, and hunt. She was being groomed to rule one of the great military powers of 17th century Europe. Her father died in battle when she was just 6 years old. Christina became Queen of Sweden. A regency council ruled in her name until she came of age at 18. In 1644, she took her seat at the head of the council and began to rule in her own right. She was a brilliant and unconventional monarch. She worked tirelessly, often sleeping only 3 or 4 hours a night. She was instrumental in negotiating the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which ended the devastating 30 Years' War. She was also a passionate patron of the arts and sciences. She spent lavishly to turn her capital, Stockholm, into the Athens of the North. She invited scholars and artists from all over Europe to her court, most famously the French philosopher René Descartes. She built a magnificent library and art collection. She was a true intellectual, more interested in books and ideas than in court ceremony or politics. But there was a problem. She was expected to marry and produce an heir. The survival of the Vasa dynasty depended on it. But Christina had no interest in marriage. She found the expectations of a queen's life, the court rituals, the domestic duties, the subordination to a husband to be suffocating. She famously said, "I could not, in conscience, marry. I was not made for it." She was also going through a deep personal and spiritual crisis. She had been raised as a devout Lutheran, the head of the Swedish state church. But she found herself increasingly drawn to Catholicism, a faith that was outlawed in Sweden and seen as the religion of its enemies. To be a Catholic was an act of political and spiritual treason for a Swedish monarch. She was trapped. She was the queen, but she did not want the life of a queen. She was the head of the Lutheran Church, but she no longer believed in its doctrines. She was expected to marry and have children, but she had a deep aversion to the idea. So, in 1654, at the age of 28, and at the height of her power, she did something absolutely shocking. She abdicated the throne. She gave up her crown, her country, and her wealth. She left Sweden in disguise, dressed as a man, and traveled across Europe. She made her way to Rome, where she officially converted to Catholicism in a grand public ceremony. She spent the rest of her life in Rome as a celebrated and often controversial figure. She established a salon that became a center of Roman cultural life. She was a patron of artists and musicians. She involved herself in church and European politics. She lived her life on her own terms, free from the constraints of the Swedish crown. Christina's story is a radical statement about self-determination. She was given a life of immense power and privilege, a life that most people could only dream of. And she walked away from it because it was not the life she wanted. Her advice is that you have the right to choose your own path, even if that path seems incomprehensible to others. This is a deeply personal lesson. Many people find themselves on a path laid out for them by their parents, their society, or their own early decisions. It might be a career path, a lifestyle, or a set of expectations about marriage and family. They can be successful on that path, but feel deeply unfulfilled. Christina's life is an extreme example of what it means to listen to your inner voice and make a drastic change. Her abdication was not a sign of weakness or failure. It was an act of immense courage. It required her to give up everything she had ever known to pursue a life that was more authentic to her true self. The lesson isn't that everyone should quit their job and move to Rome. It's about having the courage to question the path you are on. It's about asking yourself, is this really what I want? Is this life aligned with my values and my passions? Christina reminds us that you are the ultimate authority on your own life. You do not need to live up to someone else's expectations. Her choice was scandalous in her time. Many of her contemporaries thought she was mad, but she chose her own intellectual and spiritual freedom over a kingdom. She decided that it was better to be the author of her own life, even if it was a smaller, less grand life in the eyes of the world, than to be a character in a story written by someone else. Number 7. How do you finish a race you started so far behind? She was a minor German princess from a small, insignificant principality. Her name was Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst. In 1744, at the age of 15, she was chosen to marry the heir to the Russian throne, the Grand Duke Peter. She traveled to Russia, a vast, strange, and intimidating country. She was a nobody, a political pawn in a dynastic marriage. She would go on to rule Russia for 34 years as Catherine the Great, one of the most powerful and successful monarchs in the country's history. Her journey was a masterclass in playing the long game. From the moment she arrived in Russia, she understood her precarious position. Her marriage to Peter was a disaster. He was immature, foolish, and openly despised her. He played with toy soldiers and took a mistress, leaving Catherine isolated and neglected in the Russian court. The reigning empress, Elizabeth, kept a close watch on her. Catherine knew that her survival, let alone her success, depended on her ability to adapt and to wait. So she began a systematic campaign of self-transformation. She dedicated herself to becoming more Russian than the Russians. She learned the language, mastering it so well that she spoke with only a slight accent. She converted from Lutheranism to Russian Orthodoxy, embracing her new faith with public piety. She spent hours reading, devouring the works of the French Enlightenment philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot. She was educating herself for the role she intended to have, not the one she had been given. While her husband alienated everyone around him, Catherine cultivated allies. She built a network of supporters within the court, the government, and most importantly, the military. She charmed powerful courtiers and had well-placed lovers, including a young army officer named Grigory Orlov. She was patient. She spent 17 years as the Grand Duchess, enduring the humiliations of her marriage and the suspicions of the court, all the while learning, planning, and waiting. Her moment came in 1762. Empress Elizabeth died and her husband became Emperor Peter III. His reign was a catastrophe. In just 6 months, he managed to offend the church, the nobility, and the military. He made a humiliating peace with Prussia, Russia's great enemy, and tried to force the army to adopt Prussian-style uniforms and drills. The dissatisfaction was widespread. Catherine, with the help of the Orlov brothers and her other supporters in the Imperial Guard, saw her chance. In a swift and bloodless coup, she had her husband arrested. She then went to the barracks of the Guard regiments, who joyfully proclaimed her the new ruler of Russia. And Peter III abdicated and was killed a few days later under mysterious circumstances. At the age of 33, the German princess, with no claim to the Russian throne, had made herself the absolute ruler of the largest empire on earth. Catherine's reign is known as a golden age for the Russian Empire. She expanded its borders dramatically, annexing large parts of Poland and defeating the Ottoman Empire to gain control of the northern coast of the Black Sea. She was a great patron of the arts, sciences, and education. She corresponded with Voltaire, founded schools, and established the Hermitage Museum. She tried to reform Russia's legal system, though her efforts were often stymied by the deeply entrenched system of serfdom. The lesson from Catherine the Great is the power of patience and preparation. She started the race far behind everyone else. She was a foreigner, an unloved wife, and a woman in a political world dominated by men. She couldn't win with a quick sprint. She had to win with a marathon. For 17 years, she put in the work. She did the reading. She learned the culture. She built the relationships. When the opportunity finally presented itself, she was ready. Her coup was not an impulsive act. It was the culmination of nearly 2 decades of careful planning. This is a powerful lesson for anyone with long-term ambitions. Success rarely happens overnight. It's often the result of years of quiet, unglamorous work. It's the entrepreneur who spends years learning an industry before launching their own company. It's the writer who writes a dozen bad novels before they write a good one. It's the politician who starts in local government, learning the ropes and building a base of support long before they run for higher office. Catherine teaches us to use our time in the wilderness wisely. The periods when you are not in charge, when you feel overlooked or sidelined, are not wasted time. They are your opportunity to prepare. Learn a new skill, read everything you can, study the people who are in the positions you want. Understand the system. Build your network. Catherine's years as Grand Duchess were her training ground. She turned a position of weakness into a period of intense, focused preparation. When the moment of crisis came and the old leadership faltered, she was the only one with the knowledge, the support, and the vision to step in. She didn't just seize power, she had spent 17 years making herself worthy of it. Number 6. Can you protect your family and your empire at the same time? In 1740, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI died. He had spent most of his reign trying to secure the succession for his eldest daughter, Maria Theresa. Because the laws of the Habsburg lands barred female succession, he had persuaded the other European powers to sign a document called the Pragmatic Sanction, which recognized her as his heir. When he died, the 23-year-old Maria Theresa inherited a vast and diverse collection of territories: Austria, Hungary, Bohemia, parts of Italy, and the Netherlands. The ink on the Pragmatic Sanction was barely dry when her enemies tore it to shreds. Frederick the Great of Prussia saw his chance. He invaded the rich Habsburg province of Silesia. This triggered the War of the Austrian Succession, a brutal 8-year conflict. France, Spain, and Bavaria joined Prussia, all hoping to carve up the Habsburg inheritance. Maria Theresa was surrounded. Her treasury was empty. Her army was weak. Her ministers advised her to give in, to cede territory, to make a deal. She was a young, inexperienced woman, widely expected to fail. She refused. Her greatest asset was her indomitable will and her sense of duty. For her, protecting her empire and protecting her family were the same thing. Her inheritance was the birthright of her children. She would not give it up without a fight. One of her most dramatic moves came in 1741. She traveled to Hungary to appeal to the Hungarian nobles for support. Dressed in mourning clothes, she appeared before the Hungarian Diet, holding her infant son, the future Emperor Joseph II, in her arms. In a moving speech, she appealed to their chivalry and loyalty, a queen in distress asking her knights for help. The hardened Hungarian magnates were moved to tears. They rose to their feet, drew their swords, and famously declared, "Our lives and our blood for our queen." Hungary provided the crucial military support that helped her survive the war. Maria Theresa lost Silesia to Prussia, a bitter defeat she never accepted. But she saved the rest of her empire. The war taught her hard lessons. She spent the rest of her reign implementing sweeping reforms to strengthen her state. She reformed the military, centralized the administration, and improved the tax system to make sure the nobility and the clergy paid their fair share. She was not an intellectual like Catherine the Great or an icon like Elizabeth I. She was a pragmatist, a conservative, and a deeply devout Catholic. Her motivation was simple: to make her state strong enough to protect itself and to provide for her people. She was also a devoted wife and mother. She had a loving marriage with her husband, Francis Stephen, and they had 16 children, 10 of whom survived to adulthood. Her children included 2 future Holy Roman Emperors and the future Queen of France, Marie Antoinette. She managed the immense task of raising a large family while simultaneously running a complex, multi-ethnic empire. She wrote detailed letters of instruction to her children, advising them on everything from their religious duties to their personal hygiene. And her reign was defined by this dual role of monarch and matriarch. She saw the state as a large family and herself as the mother of her people, the Landesmutter. This was not just a sentimental image, it informed her policies. She introduced reforms to the system of serfdom, limiting the power of lords over their peasants. She established a new legal code. She promoted education. Her motivations were often conservative, and a well-educated, healthy population made for better soldiers and taxpayers, but the results were often progressive. The lesson from Maria Theresa is that responsibility can be a source of immense strength. She was not motivated by personal ambition or lust for glory. She was motivated by her duty to her family and her inheritance. This sense of responsibility gave her the courage to stand up to the most powerful kings in Europe when she was at her weakest. It gave her the stamina to push through difficult and unpopular reforms. In our own lives, our responsibilities can sometimes feel like burdens. The demands of a job, a family, a community can be exhausting. But Maria Theresa's example suggests that these responsibilities can also be our greatest anchor. They give us a reason to persevere when things are difficult. They push us to be better than we thought we could be. Her fight was not for herself, it was for her son in her arms, for the future of her dynasty. She also shows that it is possible to integrate different aspects of your life. For her, there was no separation between her public and private roles. Being a mother made her a better ruler, giving her a sense of protectiveness towards her subjects. Being a ruler gave her the resources and the drive to secure a future for her children. She found strength in her roles as queen and mother, and she used that strength to save her empire from collapse and turn it into a modern, resilient state. Number 5, what do you do when surrender is not an option? In the mid-19th century, the British East India Company was rapidly expanding its control over the Indian subcontinent. It used a policy called the Doctrine of Lapse, which stated that if the ruler of a princely state died without a natural male heir, the state would be annexed by the British. In 1853, the ruler of the small kingdom of Jhansi died. He and his wife, Rani Lakshmibai, had adopted a son just before his death. The British refused to recognize the boy as the heir and ordered the annexation of Jhansi. Rani Lakshmibai was in her early 20s. She was a young widow who was expected to live a life of quiet retirement. She petitioned the British authorities, appealing to their sense of justice. Her pleas were ignored. She was offered a pension and told to vacate the palace and the fort. She gave a famous reply, Mary Jhansi, Nahi Dongi, I will not give up my Jhansi. For a few years, there was an uneasy peace, but in 1857, a massive rebellion broke out across northern India against the rule of the East India Company. It is known as the Indian Rebellion, or the First War of Indian Independence. The rebellion spread to Jhansi, and the local British officials were killed by the rebels. Lakshmi Bai found herself in a difficult position. She tried to maintain order, but the British saw her as a traitor. In 1858, a large British force under Sir Hugh Rose arrived to retake the city. Lakshmi Bai had a choice. She could surrender and hope for mercy, or she could fight. She chose to fight. She organized the defense of Jhansi, leading her troops, both men and women, with incredible courage. For 2 weeks, the small garrison of Jhansi held out against the well-equipped British army. The city was bombarded relentlessly. When the British finally breached the walls, there was fierce hand-to-hand fighting in the streets. When the fall of the fort was imminent, Lakshmi Bai executed a daring escape. In the middle of the night, with her adopted son tied to her back, she mounted her horse and leaped over the fort's walls, escaping with a small group of guards. It was an act of legendary bravery. She rode 100 miles to join up with other rebel leaders. She did not seek a position of safety. She went right back into the fight. She argued that the rebels needed to take a strong, defensible position. With another rebel leader, Tantia Tope, she led a successful assault on the fortress city of Gwalior. It was a major victory for the rebels, but the British were quick to respond. They attacked Gwalior just a few days later. Lakshmi Bai led the defense. Dressed as a cavalry leader, she fought on horseback. On the second day of the battle, on June 18, 1858, she was killed in action. She was 29 years old. Even her enemies were in awe of her. Sir Hugh Rose, the general who had pursued her, later described her as the best and bravest of the rebel leaders. Rani Lakshmi Bai's story is about leading from the front. When faced with an overwhelming force and an impossible situation, she did not direct the battle from a safe distance. She was on the walls of the fort. She was in the thick of the fighting. Her personal courage inspired her people to fight with a ferocity that surprised the British. This is a powerful lesson in leadership. It's not enough to give orders. True leadership requires you to share the risks and the hardships of your team. It's the startup founder who works the same long hours as their employees. It's the military officer who eats the same rations as their soldiers. It's the manager who steps in to help their team meet a difficult deadline rather than just supervising. When people see that their leader is in the trenches with them, they are inspired to give their best effort. Lakshmi Bai also teaches us about the power of conviction. She was fighting for her home, for her son's inheritance, and for her people's dignity. Her cause was clear, and just in her own mind, this conviction gave her the strength to face impossible odds. She had reached a point where surrender was not a morally acceptable option. You know, when you believe deeply in what you are doing, you can find reserves of courage and resilience you never knew you had. Her story is not one of victory. She lost. Her kingdom was annexed. The rebellion was crushed. But she became a symbol of resistance against colonial rule, a national hero in India. Her legacy is a reminder that some battles are about more than winning or losing. They are about standing up for what you believe in, even when you know you are likely to fail. Sometimes the act of fighting itself is a victory. Rani Lakshmi Bai refused to be a victim of history. She chose to be a warrior, and by leading from the front, she created a legend that has inspired generations. Number 4, how do you steer a sinking ship? In the late 19th century, China's Qing dynasty was in a state of terminal decline. The empire was being carved up by foreign powers. It had suffered humiliating defeats in the Opium Wars. It was racked by internal rebellions. The government was corrupt and ineffective. The ship of state was sinking, and for nearly 50 years, the person at the helm was a woman, the Empress Dowager Cixi. Cixi entered the Forbidden City in 1852 as a low-ranking concubine to the Xianfeng Emperor. She rose to prominence by giving birth to the emperor's only son and heir. When the emperor died in 1861, her 5-year-old son became the Tongzhi Emperor. Cixi, along with the emperor's official wife, became co-regents. She was not supposed to have real power. The late emperor had appointed a council of 8 regents to run the government. But Cixi was far more ambitious and politically skilled than anyone realized. In a carefully planned palace coup, she had the 8 regents arrested and executed. She took control of the government, ruling from behind a silk screen in the audience hall. For the next 47 years, through the reigns of 2 young emperors, she was the de facto ruler of China. Her long rule is one of the most controversial in Chinese history. To her detractors, she was a corrupt, power-hungry despot who clung to outdated traditions and prevented China from modernizing, ultimately leading to the collapse of the dynasty. To her defenders, she was a brilliant political survivor who did the best she could to hold a disintegrating empire together in an impossible situation. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Cixi was a master of court politics. She skillfully played factions against each other to maintain her own power. She was not anti-modernization in principle. In the early part of her rule, during what was known as the Tongzi Restoration, she supported a reform movement called the Self-Strengthening Movement. This was a policy of adopting Western technology, particularly military technology, while preserving traditional Chinese culture and institutions. New arsenals, shipyards, and schools were built. It was an attempt to graft Western hardware onto a Confucian software. But she was also deeply conservative and suspicious of any change that threatened the power of the dynasty or her own position. When her nephew, the Guangxu Emperor, tried to implement a radical set of reforms in 1898 known as the 100 Days Reform, she saw it as a threat. The reforms aimed to modernize the government, the education system, and the military along Western lines. And Cixi, with the backing of conservative officials in the army, staged another coup. She put the emperor under house arrest and executed the leading reformers. Her worst decision was her support for the Boxer Rebellion in 1900. The Boxers were a secret society that wanted to drive all foreigners out of China. Cixi, miscalculating the situation, declared war on 8 foreign powers. The result was a disaster. An international army invaded China, captured Beijing, and forced the imperial court to flee. China was forced to sign yet another humiliating treaty and pay a massive indemnity. Cixi spent the last years of her life belatedly trying to implement some of the reforms she had previously crushed. But it was too little, too late. She died in 1908. The Qing dynasty collapsed just 3 years later. The lesson from Cixi's long and troubled reign is about the difference between survival and progress. Cixi was a brilliant survivor. She held on to power for half a century against all odds. She steered the sinking ship, patching the leaks, throwing cargo overboard, and keeping it afloat long after many thought it would have gone under. Survival in such a hostile environment is a form of victory in itself. This is a lesson for any leader managing an organization in decline or in a crisis. Sometimes just keeping the enterprise alive is the main goal. It's about making tough choices, managing limited resources, and navigating treacherous political waters. Cixi's ability to balance competing factions and maintain a grip on power was remarkable, but her story is also a warning. She was so focused on her own survival and the survival of the dynasty in its existing form that she resisted the fundamental changes that were necessary for the country's long-term health. She confused the survival of the institution with the well-being of the people it was supposed to serve. She was willing to adopt Western guns and ships, but not Western political ideas or institutions that might have saved China. The lesson is that while survival is necessary, it is not sufficient. A leader must also have a vision for the future. You cannot just keep patching the old ship. At some point, you have to build a new one. Cixi was a master tactician, but she was not a great strategist. She could win the political battles of the day, but she ultimately lost the war for China's future. She shows us that sometimes the hardest part of leadership is not holding on, but knowing when to let go of the old ways to make room for the new. Number 3, does influence matter more than direct power? When the 18-year-old Victoria became Queen of the United Kingdom in 1837, the political power of the monarchy was in decline. The days of absolute monarchs were long gone. Britain was a constitutional monarchy, and power was increasingly concentrated in Parliament and the Prime Minister. Victoria could not command armies or pass laws on her own. Many thought the monarchy was becoming a mere ceremonial role. Yet, by the end of her 63-year reign, she was the symbol of a global empire on which the sun never set, and the grandmother of Europe. Victoria's reign, the longest in British history until the current monarch, was a period of immense change. It was the age of the Industrial Revolution, of massive social upheaval, of scientific discovery, and of the vast expansion of the British Empire. Victoria did not direct these changes, but she adapted to her changing role and found a new source of power influence. In the early years of her reign, she was heavily reliant on her first Prime Minister, Lord Melbourne, who acted as a father figure and political mentor. Her marriage to her cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, in 1840 was a turning point. Albert was a serious, intelligent, and reform-minded man. He became her closest advisor and partner. He guided her in her constitutional role, encouraging her to rise above partisan politics and become a unifying figure for the nation. Together they championed a new model of the monarchy. It was a model based on family, duty, and middle-class morality. Victoria and Albert had 9 children, and they projected an image of a happy, respectable family. This was a deliberate contrast to the scandalous behavior of previous monarchs. They made the monarchy something the public could admire and relate to. This moral authority became a significant source of their influence. Albert was the driving force behind the Great Exhibition of 1851, a massive showcase of industrial technology and design from around the world, held in the spectacular Crystal Palace in London. It was a celebration of British industry and progress, and it was a huge public success. It helped to cement the monarchy's role as a patron of progress and a symbol of national pride. When Albert died suddenly in 1861, Victoria was devastated. She went into a deep period of mourning and withdrew from public life for many years. Her seclusion made her unpopular, and Republican sentiment grew. But she eventually returned to her duties, guided by prime ministers like Benjamin Disraeli, who understood the importance of the monarchy as a symbol. Disraeli flattered her, consulted her, and in 1876 had her declared Empress of India, a title that she cherished. It linked her directly to the growing empire. Victoria never regained absolute power, but she wielded considerable influence. She had the right to be consulted, to encourage, and to warn, and she used it. She read all the government dispatches. She had strong opinions on foreign policy and military appointments. She wrote thousands of letters to her ministers expressing her views in her famously underlined script. A prime minister who crossed her could find their job very difficult. Her influence also extended across Europe. Through the marriages of her 9 children, she was connected to nearly every royal house on the continent, including those of Germany, Russia, Greece, and Spain. This network of family relationships gave her a unique perspective and a channel of informal diplomacy. The lesson from Queen Victoria's reign is about adapting to a changing power dynamic. When direct authority wanes, you have to find new ways to be effective. Victoria understood that she could no longer rule by command, so she learned to rule by influence. This is a critical lesson for anyone in a leadership position today. In modern organizations, command and control leadership is often ineffective. The best leaders lead not by giving orders, but by persuading, inspiring, and building consensus. And Victoria's power came from several sources. First, her moral authority. She embodied the values of her age. Second, her experience. After decades on the throne, she had seen more and knew more than most of her ministers. Her institutional memory was invaluable. Third, her network. Her family connections gave her a unique reach. This provides a roadmap for building influence in any context. Build your reputation. Be seen as someone with integrity and good judgment. Become an expert in your field. The more you know, the more people will seek your opinion, and build your network. Cultivate relationships based on trust and mutual respect. Victoria shows that you don't need a formal title or direct reports to be a leader. Influence is a more subtle and often more powerful form of power. She could not pass a single law, but her values and her image defined an entire era. She adapted to a world where her formal power was limited, and in doing so, created a new modern role for the monarchy that has allowed it to survive to this day. Number two, how do you negotiate when you have nothing left to lose? By the year 30 BC, the Roman Republic was in its final death throes, and a new empire was being born. The last great obstacle to the absolute power of Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, was in Egypt. It was Queen Cleopatra VII. Her kingdom was the last of the great Hellenistic successor states founded after Alexander the Great, and she was a formidable opponent. Cleopatra was not just a beautiful seductress as she is often portrayed. She was a brilliant, highly educated, and politically shrewd ruler. She was the only member of her dynasty to learn the Egyptian language. She was a skilled negotiator and a charismatic leader. For 2 decades, she had played the dangerous game of Roman power politics to protect her kingdom's independence. She had allied herself with Julius Caesar, had a son with him, and after his assassination, allied herself with his lieutenant, Mark Antony. Her alliance with Antony was both a political partnership and a genuine love affair. Together, they ruled the eastern half of the Roman world from Alexandria. They had 3 children. They dreamed of a new kind of empire, a Roman Hellenistic hybrid with its center in the east. But this dream put them in direct conflict with Octavian in Rome. The final confrontation came at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BC. The fleet of Antony and Cleopatra was decisively defeated by Octavian's forces. They fled back to Egypt with Octavian in pursuit. Their armies deserted them. Their allies abandoned them. They were trapped in Alexandria with Octavian's legions closing in. Antony, hearing a false report of Cleopatra's death, took his own life. Cleopatra was now alone. Her kingdom was lost. Her lover was dead. She was a captive of her mortal enemy. She had nothing left to lose. Octavian wanted to take her back to Rome and parade her in his triumph, just as his predecessors had paraded other captive queens. It would be the ultimate symbol of his victory and the conquest of Egypt. Cleopatra had one last card to play. She requested a meeting with Octavian. When he came to her, she did not beg for her life. According to the Roman historians, she used every tool at her disposal. She tried to charm him. She reminded him of her connection to his adoptive father, Julius Caesar. She presented herself as a helpless woman, but also as a proud queen. She was trying to negotiate a future for her children, but Octavian was cold and calculating. He was not susceptible to her charms as Caesar and Antony had been. He wanted her as a trophy. Cleopatra realized that she could not win her freedom or save her kingdom. But she could control one last thing, her own ending. She would not be humiliated. She would not be dragged through the streets of Rome in chains. After her meeting with Octavian, she made her final preparations. She reportedly had a poisonous asp, a symbol of divine royalty in Egypt, smuggled to her in a basket of figs. She died by its bite, a death befitting a pharaoh. Her suicide was her final act of defiance. She denied Octavian his greatest prize. She chose her own death rather than a life of humiliation. Cleopatra's final days offer a stark lesson in negotiation. She had lost all her leverage. She had no army, no money, no allies. The only thing she had left was her own dignity and her own life. And she used that as her final negotiating tool. Her meeting with Octavian was not about winning. It was about understanding her opponent's objective to humiliate her and finding a way to deny it to him. This is a lesson about understanding your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, or batna. In most negotiations, your power comes from your ability to walk away and take another option. Cleopatra's batna was death. It was a terrible alternative, but it was better in her mind than the agreement Octavian was offering, which was total submission and public humiliation. By being willing to embrace her worst-case scenario, she took control of, the situation. This principle applies in less dramatic circumstances. When you are negotiating a salary, a business deal, or any conflict, you need to know what you will do if you can't reach an agreement. Your power comes from being genuinely willing to walk away from a bad deal. If you are desperate, your opponent will sense it and take advantage. Cleopatra's story also teaches us to use every tool at our disposal. She was a monarch, but she was also a woman. She used her intellect, her charm, her status, and her history in her final confrontation with Octavian. She adapted her strategy to her audience. The lesson is to be creative and flexible in your approach. Don't rely on just one argument or one tactic. In the end, Cleopatra lost her kingdom, but she won control over her own legacy. She died a queen on her own terms in her own land. She turned a total defeat into a personal victory that has fascinated the world for over 2,000 years. She knew how to negotiate even when all she had left to bargain with was her own life. Number one, what is the cost of underestimating someone's grief? Around the year 60 AD, Prasutagus, the king of the Iceni, a Celtic tribe in the east of Britain, died. For years, he had been a loyal client king of the Roman Empire, which had conquered southern Britain 2 decades earlier. In his will, he tried to protect his family and his people. He left his kingdom jointly to the Roman emperor and his own 2 daughters. He hoped this would ensure a smooth transition and maintain a degree of independence for the Iceni. He was wrong. As soon as he was dead, the Romans showed their true face. They ignored the will. They declared the kingdom to be Roman property. The Roman procurator, the chief financial officer of the province, sent his men to seize the king's lands and property. When the king's widow, Boudica, protested, she was publicly flogged. Her 2 young daughters were raped by Roman soldiers. It was an act of calculated brutality designed to humiliate the royal family and crush the spirit of the Iceni people. The Romans saw Boudica as a powerless woman, a barbarian, whose grief and dignity were of no consequence. They had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had not crushed her spirit. They had unleashed a fury that would bring Roman Britain to the brink of collapse. Boudica's personal grievance became the spark for a massive tribal uprising. The Iceni, joined by their neighbors the Trinovantes and other tribes, rose in rebellion. And at their head was the wronged Queen Boudica. She was a charismatic and powerful figure. The Roman historian Cassius Dio described her as tall and terrifying in appearance, with a great mass of red hair that fell to her hips, a harsh voice, and a piercing gaze. She was a brilliant and ferocious military leader. Her army, a vast horde of tribal warriors, swept through the Roman province. They targeted the symbols of Roman power. Their first target was Camulodunum, modern Colchester, the capital of Roman Britain, and a settlement for retired Roman soldiers. The city had no walls. The rebels burned it to the ground, slaughtering its inhabitants. Next, they marched on Londinium, London, a thriving commercial center. The Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, was away in Wales, campaigning against the Druids. He raced back, but realized he did not have enough troops to defend the city. He abandoned it to its fate. Boudica's army descended on Londinium, burning it and killing everyone they found. They did the same to the city of Verulamium, St. Albans. Roman archaeologists can still find a thick red layer of burned debris under these modern cities, a physical scar left by Boudica's rebellion. In a few weeks, an estimated 70,000 to 80,000 Romans and pro-Roman Britons had been killed. Boudica's army was not a disciplined fighting force. It was an instrument of pure vengeance. They took no prisoners. They offered no mercy. They were paying back the Romans for their arrogance and their cruelty in the only currency they had. The Roman governor, Suetonius, finally gathered his legions, a force of about 10,000 men. He was heavily outnumbered by Boudica's army, which may have been as large as 200,000. But the Romans were professional soldiers, disciplined and heavily armed. Suetonius chose his ground carefully, a narrow defile with a forest at his back, which protected his flanks. The final battle was a clash between 2 different ways of war. The Britons charged forward in a great disorganized mass. The Romans stood firm, first hurling their javelins, and then advancing in a tight, disciplined wedge, their short swords doing devastating work. The superior training and tactics of the Roman legionaries were decisive. The British horde was routed. The Roman historians claim that 80,000 Britons were killed, with very few Roman losses. Boudica, rather than be captured, took poison and died. The rebellion was over. The Romans unleashed brutal reprisals, but they also learned a lesson. They reformed their administration in Britain, making it less predatory. The lesson from Boudica's story is a stark one: never underestimate an opponent, especially one you have wronged. The Romans' fatal error was their contempt for Boudica. They saw her as a weak woman and treated her with a disdain that ignited a firestorm. Her grief and her humiliation did not make her weak. They made her powerful. They gave her a cause that united the tribes and a righteous fury that fueled her campaign. This is a fundamental lesson in human psychology. When you push people too far, when you strip them of their dignity and their hope, you create a dangerous enemy. You leave them with nothing to lose. The same is true in any conflict, whether it's in business, politics, or personal life. If you treat a competitor, a colleague, or a partner with disrespect, you are creating an adversary who will be motivated by more than just professional ambition. They will be motivated by a desire for retribution. Boudica's rebellion was a primal scream of defiance. It was a failure in the end, but it came terrifyingly close to succeeding. It was a bloody reminder that power is not just about armies and institutions. It is also about emotion. Grief, anger, and a thirst for justice can be forces as powerful as any legion. The Romans flogged a queen and thought it was the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The most important lesson from Boudica is to understand the cost. The cost of arrogance, the cost of cruelty, and the terrible, unpredictable cost of underestimating someone's grief.